Have you ever stopped to ask yourself who you really are, beyond what others expect of you? The journey to self-knowledge is one of the most powerful and transformative paths we can embark on, but it is also one of the most challenging. In this video, we explore the teachings of Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of all time, who invites us to face our shadows, discover our true selves, and embrace our deepest potential. Do you have the courage to look within and confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding? This is a journey of the soul, a journey towards your authenticity, and only the brave dare to walk it. Join me in this deep exploration of the self. Imagine that you live a seemingly stable life. Your days pass between responsibilities, routines, and pleasures that, although comfortable, fail to fill an inexplicable void. Perhaps you've had recurring dreams, images that you don't understand but that haunt you. It could be the feeling of being disconnected from something essential. This is the soul calling, demanding to be recognized. According to Jung, ignoring this call does not make it disappear. On the contrary, denial causes physical and emotional symptoms such as anxiety, sadness, and sometimes psychosomatic illnesses. Answering the call is not simple because it involves abandoning certainties. The first obstacle is the ego, this part of our psyche that has formed to protect us and give us an identity. The ego fears change because it feeds on stability, but to move forward, we must be willing to confront the hardest questions. Who am I really beyond my social roles? What do I deeply desire? In myths and epic tales, this call appears as the voice of a wise old man, an unexpected crisis, or an impossible challenge to ignore. In daily life, it can be a sudden change, such as losing a job, the end of a relationship, or a transformative encounter. The essence of the journey lies not in the event itself, but in the decision to face it. Jung explained it as a soul awakening, a connection with our authentic self that pushes us to explore the unknown. The journey begins at this point when we decide to look inward, but this first step does not necessarily imply clarity. On the contrary, it often brings more confusion. Daily life becomes an uncomfortable ground. Old beliefs and habits no longer fit. Jung described this state as the beginning of a rupture between the ego and the unconscious. In this clash of forces, doors open to a new path. Answering the call also requires courage, because the unknown always generates fear. For many people, this means facing the possibility of giving up external structures that define their life. Work, relationships, or even religious beliefs can be challenged. Jung understood that this stage is deeply disturbing, but also necessary for growth. The soul, in its insistence, does not seek to destroy us, but to liberate us. Listening to it requires an act of faith, trusting that although the path is uncertain, there is something greater waiting for us at the end. This is the promise of the journey to oneself, discovering a more authentic life, full of purpose and connection. However, not everyone accepts the call. Jung observed that many people choose to ignore it, clinging to the ego and resisting change. These choices do not eliminate the conflict. They simply relegate it to the unconscious, where it continues to manifest in more complex ways. That is why the first step towards self-discovery is to accept the invitation to the journey, even if we don't know where it will lead us. As Jung said, the encounter with oneself is the most terrifying experience, but also the most essential. The awakening of the soul is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. As we progress, we discover that each step toward the unknown brings us closer to our essence, and although the path is filled with challenges, it is also where we find true freedom. The concept of the collective unconscious, one of Carl Jung's greatest contributions to psychology, invites us to imagine a vast ocean shared by all humanity. Unlike the personal unconscious, which consists of our individual experiences, memories, and emotions, the collective unconscious is made up of archetypes and primordial images that do not belong to any particular individual, but to all. It is like a map etched into our psyche, a hidden library containing the essential stories of humanity. For Jung, the collective unconscious is what connects people across time and space. It is present in ancient mythologies, religious symbols, fairy tales, and surprisingly in our dreams. For example, the figure of the hero, which appears in stories from Gilgamesh to Star Wars, is a manifestation of a collective archetype. This hero is not just a character, but a symbol of our inner ability to face challenges and grow. By connecting with this unconscious, we understand that our personal struggles echo throughout the history of humanity. But why is the collective unconscious important in our journey to the soul? Because it offers tools and guides. It's like finding a hidden instruction manual that contains the keys to understanding who we are and what the meaning of our existence is. Each time we face a crisis or seek meaning in our lives, the collective unconscious offers its symbols as signs of guidance. For example, dreaming of water can symbolize emotions or a process of transformation, a meaning that transcends cultures and epochs. This concept also changes our perception of ourselves. We realize that we are not isolated, but deeply connected to others. The emotions, fears, and aspirations we experience are not just ours, they are universal. In this sense, the collective unconscious helps us overcome the feeling of loneliness and connects us to a global psychic network. Jung observed that many people disconnect from this vast internal treasure because modern society privileges the rational and the conscious. However, in doing so, we lose access to a source of creativity, wisdom, and healing. To reconnect with the collective unconscious, we need to pay attention to our dreams, meditate on the symbols that appear in our daily lives, and explore the stories and myths that resonate with us. A powerful example of this process is found in Mandalas, symbolic circles that represent wholeness. Jung discovered that many people, even without knowing their meaning, would draw mandalas during moments of crisis or transformation. These drawings, which appear in various cultures since ancient times, are manifestations of the collective unconscious that attempt to restore internal balance. The collective unconscious also challenges us to face our limitations. It reminds us that we are not completely free to create our identity from scratch, because we carry within us a psychic legacy that influences how we think, feel, and act. However, this legacy is not a burden, but an opportunity to discover who we truly are. By exploring this inner ocean, we also encounter the limits of our perception, how much of what we believe is truly ours, and how much comes from collective patterns we have inherited. Jung believed that the journey to the soul required a conscious integration of these archetypes and symbols. In doing so, we not only discover our connection with humanity, but also unlock our potential to live more authentically. Finally, the collective unconscious shows us that the journey to the soul is not only a personal journey, but also a journey toward the universal. By immersing ourselves in this shared world, we understand that our individual stories are part of a much larger narrative. This recognition gives us perspective, purpose, and a sense of belonging that transcends the individual. Isn't that what we all seek in the vast territory of the collective unconscious? The archetypes are like signs that light the way. Carl Jung described archetypes as universal patterns present in all cultures and eras that shape our life experience. They are the essential figures we encounter in myths, dreams, and stories, but also in our relationships, emotions, and decisions. Archetypes are not simple concepts, but dynamic forces that influence us from the deepest parts of our psyche. One of the most well-known archetypes is the hero, a figure that represents the human ability to face challenges and transform in the process. From ancient epics like the Odyssey to modern superhero stories, the hero appears as a reflection of our inner struggle to overcome our limitations and find our purpose. However, the hero does not act alone on their journey. They always encounter other archetypes, the mentor who guides them, the shadow representing their deepest fears, and the inner child who holds their hope and vulnerability. But archetypes do not only reside in myths, they live within us. For example, the archetype of the mother is not limited to the figure of the one who gave us life. It manifests in any relationship of care and nourishment, whether with a person, an idea, or even a creative project. Similarly, the archetype of the wise old man is not just an elderly figure with knowledge. It represents our own capacity to seek and recognize the truth. These patterns act as hidden guides because, although we do not perceive them directly, they influence our choices and behaviors. When we face an important decision, it is common for internal conflicts to arise between different archetypes. The hero might urge us to take risks, while the caregiver encourages us to protect what we already have. Recognizing these archetypes allows us to understand our motivations and balance them to make more conscious decisions. Archetypes also play a crucial role in dreams. Jung observed that dreams not only reflect our daily life, but serve as a bridge to the collective unconscious. Dreaming of a powerful figure, like a wise old man or a fierce animal, could be a manifestation of an archetype trying to communicate something important to us. For example, dreaming of a dragon may symbolize the shadow, an aspect of ourselves we fear but which also holds great power. Working with archetypes is not a passive process. It requires attention and reflection. Jung recommended techniques like active imagination, where the individual consciously dialogues with the internal figures that appear in their dreams or fantasies. This dialogue not only helps understand the messages of the unconscious, but also facilitates the integration of archetypes into our conscious life. However, archetypes are neither inherently good nor bad. Their influence depends on how we interact with them. An archetype we do not recognize can dominate us unconsciously, while one we consciously integrate can become a source of strength. For example, the rebel archetype can lead us to challenge injustices, but it may also cause destruction without purpose if we do not handle it wisely. Knowledge of archetypes also connects us with others. By understanding that we all share these universal figures, it becomes easier to empathize with the experiences of others. We recognize that although our stories are different, we are facing the same essential struggles: the fear of the shadow, the search for the inner hero, the longing for wisdom and connection. Ultimately, archetypes are tools for personal growth. They show us who we can become and what we need to face to get there. They invite us to explore the deeper aspects of our psyche and use their energy to transform our lives. By doing so, we not only find answers but also purpose and direction. Archetypes are the allies that have always been with us, even though we rarely recognize them. Exploring their messages and working with them is an essential step on the journey to the soul. As Jung said, archetypes are the great images of life. They contain the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future. The shadow is one of the most fascinating and challenging concepts in Carl Jung's work. It represents all the aspects of our personality that we prefer to ignore, reject, or repress. These are the parts of ourselves that we consider unacceptable, such as fears, desires, impulses, or emotions that don't fit the idealized image we've constructed of ourselves. However, the shadow is not simply the bad side of our psyche. It is also a source of immense creative power and transformation. From the beginning of our lives, we learn to divide ourselves between what we show the world and what we hide. This happens because we want to belong and be accepted. If, as children, we were taught that anger was unacceptable, we learned to hide it. If we were told that we should not be too ambitious, we buried that desire in the unconscious. As we grow, our shadow forms as a hidden trunk where we throw everything we do not want to face. However, the shadow does not disappear. It remains in the unconscious, affecting our actions and relationships indirectly. One common way it manifests is through projection. This occurs when we attribute traits of our shadow to others. For example, someone who represses their own ambition may criticize others for being too competitive. Projection allows us to avoid facing our own darkness, but it also distorts our perception of the world. Working with the shadow is not an easy task. It requires courage to face what we've been avoiding for so long. Jung believed this process begins with self-observation. Dreams, for instance, are often a direct window into the shadow. If you dream of being chased by a terrifying figure, that figure might represent a part of you that you've rejected but which demands to be recognized. Another method Jung recommended is active imagination, a technique that involves dialoguing with the symbolic figures emerging from our unconscious. For example, if you feel overwhelmed by jealousy that you cannot control, instead of repressing it, you could explore where it comes from and what it is trying to tell you. Perhaps you will discover that these jealous feelings are not just a problem, but contain information about an unmet desire or a deep insecurity that needs healing. Facing the shadow does not mean eliminating it, but integrating it. This involves accepting that we are complex beings with both light and darkness coexisting within us. Integrating the shadow allows us to reclaim parts of ourselves that we had lost. For instance, someone who has repressed their aggression might learn to use that energy to set healthy boundaries and defend their needs. However, working with the shadow also has its risks. Jung warned that confronting the shadow without preparation or guidance can be overwhelming. That is why many find it helpful to work with a therapist or mentor who can provide support during this process. It is also essential to have a solid foundation of self-awareness and self-care before diving into the darker aspects of the psyche. The reward of this work, however, is immense. When we integrate the shadow, we gain a sense of wholeness and authenticity. We no longer need to spend energy pretending to be something we are not. Instead of fighting against our emotions and desires, we can use them as allies in our personal growth. Moreover, by recognizing our own darkness, we become more understanding and tolerant of others. We understand that everyone has their own shadow, and that judging it only perpetuates conflict. On the path of self-discovery, the shadow is not an enemy to defeat, but a teacher that challenges us to know ourselves deeply. It is the guardian of the hidden treasures of our psyche that we can only claim if we have the courage to face it. As Jung said, no one illuminates themselves by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Integrating the shadow is a crucial step toward individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. By accepting our complexity, we find freedom and power because, in the end, the shadow is not something we should fear, but an essential part of our humanity. Only when we embrace it can we walk toward true fulfillment. One of the greatest challenges on the journey toward the soul is the complexes. Carl Jung described them as fragments of the psyche that are autonomous, deeply charged with emotion, and influence our behavior, thoughts, and relationships. Complexes are not mental illnesses. They are natural mechanisms of our mind that, if not recognized and integrated, can sabotage our personal growth. A complex forms when an intense emotional experience gets trapped in the unconscious, generating an energetic knot. For example, a childhood marked by abandonment could create an abandonment complex that gets activated every time we perceive real or imagined signs of rejection in our relationships. This complex acts like an open wound, magnifying our emotional responses and leading us to react disproportionately. These complexes have a life of their own. Jung observed that when a complex is activated, it is as if we lose control of our behavior. Suddenly, we say or do things we hadn't planned, and then we ask ourselves, why did I react like that? This behavior is not accidental. It is the complex taking control. Its energy is so deeply rooted that it can temporarily disconnect us from our conscious sense of self. An important aspect of Jung's work is that complexes not only affect us negatively, they also have a purpose. They are signals from the unconscious, inviting us to explore our unresolved emotional wounds. If we ignore them, they will continue to appear in our lives, causing conflicts and pain. But if we face them, they offer us an opportunity to heal and grow. Jungian psychotherapy focuses on identifying and working with these complexes. An essential step is observation. This involves paying attention to our disproportionate emotional reactions, which are often clues that a complex is active. For example, if we feel irrational anger towards someone for a trivial comment, it might be a sign that a complex related to criticism is at work. A powerful tool for addressing complexes is dream interpretation. Jung believed that dreams are messages from the unconscious, and they often reveal the presence and nature of complexes. In a dream, a complex might appear as an obstacle, an antagonistic figure, or even a threatening animal. Interpreting these symbols helps us understand which parts of our psyche are struggling to be recognized. Another method is active imagination, a technique in which we engage in dialogue with the symbolic aspects of the complexes. For example, if you feel that a perfectionism complex is sabotaging you, you can imagine it as a figure or entity and then ask what it wants from you. This internal dialogue allows the complex to cease being an unconscious force and become an integrated part of your psyche. Although complexes may seem like obstacles, they are also portals to our unrealized potential. They often contain creative energy that, once released, can transform our life. For example, a rejection complex, when understood and worked through, can become a source of resilience and empathy toward others. However, working with complexes is not without difficulties. Many of them form during our childhood when we were more vulnerable. Reliving these experiences can be painful, which is why Jung recommended doing this work with the guidance of an experienced therapist. Additionally, complexes are often protected by defense mechanisms, which makes facing them require patience and persistence. A crucial aspect of the process is to avoid identifying completely with a complex. Saying, "I am an abandoned person," is no different from saying, "I have an abandonment complex." The first statement traps us in a limited identity, while the second allows us to recognize the complex as a part of us, but not the entirety of our being. Integrating complexes means regaining control of our life. Instead of reacting impulsively, we can respond consciously to situations. This doesn't mean the complexes disappear, but rather their influence is reduced, and their energy is channeled toward more constructive goals. Ultimately, complexes are disguised teachers. They show us where our wounds are and invite us to heal them. Working with them not only frees us from suffering, but also connects us with our inner strength. As Jung said, we are not what has happened to us. We are what we choose to become. By transforming our complexes, we get closer to that conscious sense of who we want to be. Individuation, for Carl Jung, is the fundamental process of becoming oneself. It is a deep journey of self-discovery and reconciliation between the multiple facets of our psyche. Essentially, it involves the integration of the conscious and the unconscious, a union that allows us to live with greater authenticity and purpose. This process does not seek perfection, but wholeness, accepting both our light and our shadow, our strengths and our weaknesses. From birth, we are a mosaic of fragments. Society, family, and our own experiences shape us, but they also fragment us. We learn to adopt masks, known as the persona, to navigate the external world. Meanwhile, other aspects of our being, like the shadow and repressed impulses, are relegated to the unconscious. Individuation is an act of courage, shedding those masks and confronting our true nature. The path to individuation begins with a rupture. Often this process is triggered by a crisis, such as a divorce, the death of a loved one, or a sense of existential emptiness. These experiences act as catalysts, challenging our superficial identity and forcing us to seek deeper answers. Jung described this initial stage as one between the ego and the unconscious, a time when we must face our wounds and internal conflicts without fear. The next step is recognizing the archetypal figures that emerge during this journey. In this process, the ego must learn to relate to the self, the core of the psyche that encompasses all our potentialities. The ego is only one part of our identity, but it is often confused with the whole. To achieve individuation, the ego must relinquish some control and allow the self to guide the process. This does not mean losing the ego, but rather balancing it with the rest of our psyche. Integration is at the heart of individuation. This involves working with repressed aspects such as the shadow and complexes, but also connecting with the archetypes that reside in the collective unconscious. For example, the inner hero can help us overcome paralyzing fears, while the wise one offers clarity in moments of uncertainty. This interaction between the conscious and unconscious often occurs through symbols, dreams, and creative acts that serve as bridges between both worlds. A powerful symbol that Jung used to illustrate individuation is the mandala, a circle representing wholeness. During moments of transformation, many people, even without knowing its meaning, feel the need to draw or visualize mandalas. These acts are not random. They are expressions of the unconscious seeking to balance and center our psyche. Working with mandalas and other similar symbols can help us maintain focus on the process of integration. Although individuation is a deeply personal journey, it does not occur in isolation. Our relationships act as mirrors, reflecting both our light and our shadows. Conflicts and connections with others teach us about ourselves, helping us identify aspects we need to work on. Jungian psychology emphasizes that the external and internal worlds are interconnected. Our external experiences are often reflections of internal processes. However, individuation is not linear. It is a cyclical process filled with progress and setbacks. As we integrate one aspect of our psyche, other challenges emerge. This constant movement is necessary for growth. Jung compared this process to alchemical work, a series of transformations where impurities are burned away to reveal the inner gold. The end result of individuation is not a perfect version of ourselves, but a more authentic one. A person who has traveled this path is aware of their limitations, but also of their potential. They live with greater balance, having learned to integrate their different parts rather than reject them. This state of wholeness not only benefits the individual, but also their surroundings, as those who have reached a certain degree of individuation often inspire others to embark on their own journey. Jung believed that individuation is a psychic imperative, an inherent need in all human beings. Ignoring it can lead to living a fragmented existence, disconnected from our true essence. On the other hand, embracing this process opens the doors to a richer, more meaningful life. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Individuation is not the end of the road, but the beginning of a new way of living, a continuous state of self-exploration and growth. By uniting the pieces of our being, we not only find our purpose, but also a deeper connection with the world around us. It is the most challenging but also the most rewarding journey we can undertake. In the process of self-discovery that Carl Jung outlined, symbols hold a central place. Unlike words, which are limited and rational, symbols have a unique ability to convey profound, multi-dimensional meanings. They act as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, allowing us to access truths that we cannot always articulate clearly. Jung saw symbols as the natural language of the soul, a form of expression that connects our deepest emotions, thoughts, and aspirations. Symbols are not arbitrary inventions, but spontaneous manifestations of the unconscious. They can appear in dreams, fantasies, works of art, religion, and even in our everyday lives. For example, a recurring dream of a river could symbolize a process of emotional transformation or the need to flow with life's changes. These symbols are not only relevant to the individual, but also resonate with the archetypes of the collective unconscious. In this context, the river could be connected to the archetype of flow or transition. The power of the symbol lies in its ability to contain multiple layers of meaning. The same symbol can have a different meaning for each person, depending on their experiences and context. For example, the sun may symbolize hope and vitality for one person, while for another, it could represent overwhelming pressure, like the expectation to be brilliant. Jung understood that these personal nuances enriched work with symbols as they revealed individual conflicts and aspirations. The symbol not only communicates, but also transforms. By interacting with a symbol, whether through dream interpretation, meditation, or art, we confront parts of ourselves that would otherwise remain hidden. Jung described this process as the encounter with the self, the totality of our psyche. Facing a symbol can be uncomfortable, especially if it challenges our beliefs or reveals repressed aspects of our personality. However, it is also deeply liberating, as it allows us to integrate those parts and move forward in our individuation process. A practical example of the transformative power of symbols is found in the use of mandalas, which Jung studied and utilized in his practice. Mandalas, circular structures with symmetrical patterns, represent the wholeness and balance of the self. Jung observed that people often spontaneously created mandalas during times of crisis or transformation. Drawing a mandala, meditating on one, or even dreaming of it can help us find inner balance and clarity amidst chaos. In addition to mandalas, Jung highlighted other universal symbols, such as the tree, which can represent growth and connection, the serpent, which symbolizes transformation and hidden wisdom, and the mountain, which represents effort and achievement. These symbols are deeply rooted in the collective unconscious and resonate across cultures. Though their form may vary, their essence remains constant, connecting us to something greater than ourselves. Working with symbols does not mean seeking immediate or simple answers. Jung warned against interpreting symbols literally or rigidly. For example, if you dream of a lion, the meaning is not simply courage or danger. It is necessary to explore what the lion represents to you in the context of your life and emotions. This work requires patience and openness, as symbols often communicate indirectly and through metaphors. The connection with symbols also has practical implications. Jung believed that ignoring the symbols of the unconscious could lead to psychic imbalances, such as anxiety or depression. On the other hand, paying attention to these messages allows us to make decisions that are more aligned with our inner self. For example, if you repeatedly dream of flying, the symbol could be indicating a need to free yourself from restrictions or explore new possibilities in your life. In the modern world, where rationality and logic often dominate, Jung emphasized the importance of reconnecting with symbols. These are not remnants of the past, but living tools that help us navigate life's challenges. By working with symbols, we not only deepen our understanding of ourselves, but also connect with a broader and more universal dimension of the human experience. Ultimately, symbols remind us that the journey toward the soul is not purely intellectual. It is an emotional, intuitive, and creative process. By paying attention to the symbols that emerge in our lives, we listen to the language of the soul and come closer to our true essence. As Jung said, the symbol gives expression to what cannot be said otherwise. In them, we find the map to our wholeness. Synchronicity is one of the most intriguing and revolutionary concepts of Carl Jung. He defined it as the meaningful coincidence of two or more events where there is no apparent causal relationship, but there is a deep connection in their meaning. In simpler words, it is as if the universe conspires to show us a message just when we need it most. These experiences often have an almost magical quality, reminding us that life is not just a series of random events, but is imbued with feeling and purpose. Jung developed this idea from personal observations and those of his patients. One of the most well-known cases is that of a woman who recounted a dream where a golden beetle appeared. While she was talking, a very similar beetle struck Jung's office window. This event coincided with a crucial moment in her therapy, helping her break emotional barriers and open up to new perspectives. For Jung, this was not a coincidence. It was how the inner and outer worlds can mirror each other. Synchronicity is more than just a simple coincidence. It represents a connection between our unconscious and the physical world, challenging the idea that only causal relationships are valid. This phenomenon operates outside of time and space as we understand them, creating moments of perfect alignment between what happens inside us and what occurs in our environment. For many people, synchronistic experiences happen during moments of crisis or transformation. It is as if the unconscious uses the external world to send us a message. Imagine you are considering a major life change, like quitting a job or starting a new relationship, and suddenly you encounter an unexpected sign, a song that speaks directly to your situation, a meeting with someone who shares your same concern, or a book that seems to have been written for you. These experiences are not mere coincidences, they are reminders that you are on the right path. Jung observed that synchronicity tends to occur more frequently when we are working on our individuation. During this process, our psyche seeks to integrate into a more complete whole, and synchronicity acts as a kind of compass, signaling these events. These events are not always grand. They are often subtle but profoundly meaningful to those who experience them. A fascinating aspect of synchronicity is its ability to connect us with archetypes. For example, dreaming of a mythical hero and then encountering a representation of that hero in real life could be a call to face your own challenges. These meaningful coincidences invite us to reflect on our lives from a symbolic perspective, enriching our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. Although synchronicity is deeply personal, it also has a universal aspect. Jung believed that these events reveal the existence of a greater order in the universe, which he called unus mundus, or the unified world. According to this view, the division between the internal and external is an illusion. Everything is interconnected. This concept resonates with ideas from various spiritual traditions that see synchronicity as a manifestation of the underlying unity of existence. Consciously working with synchronicity means being attentive to the signs of the world around us. This does not mean obsessively looking for patterns in everything, but rather developing a sensitivity to what resonates deeply with us. Keeping a journal of dreams and meaningful experiences can help us identify these connections and understand their message. It is also important to trust our intuition, as it is often the first indicator that something deserves our attention. However, Jung warned that interpreting synchronicity requires balance. While these experiences can be deeply inspiring, they can also lead us to overinterpret or rely solely on them for decision-making. The key is to integrate their meaning with a rational and practical understanding of our circumstances. Synchronicity reminds us that we are not alone in the universe. There is a constant dialogue between our inner world and the outer world, a dance between the conscious and the unconscious that shapes our reality. Recognizing and valuing these moments helps us feel connected to something greater than ourselves, reinforcing the idea that every step in our journey has a purpose. Ultimately, synchronicity invites us to see life as a mystery full of meaning. It asks us to trust the flow of existence and be open to the signs that guide us toward our wholeness. As Jung said, meaningful encounters are the realities that give life meaning. By paying attention to these experiences, we not only deepen our connection to the soul, but also align ourselves with the flow of the universe. The mandala, a circular symbol with a center, holds a prominent place in Carl Jung's thought as a representation of the wholeness of being. The word mandala comes from Sanskrit and means sacred circle or completeness, and it has been used for centuries in spiritual traditions around the world. However, Jung did not see the mandala as something exclusively religious or cultural, but as a universal archetype that spontaneously arises in times of crisis, transformation, and the search for inner balance. For Jung, the mandala symbolizes the process of individuation, the journey toward the integration of all parts of our psyche, the conscious, the unconscious, and the collective unconscious. In his work, he observed that many people, even without knowing its meaning, would naturally draw mandalas during periods of confusion or personal renewal. These drawings were not mere doodles, but expressions of the soul's attempt to find balance and order amidst chaos. The mandala appears in various cultures, from medieval labyrinths in Christian churches to Tibetan diagrams used in meditation. However, its essence transcends any cultural or religious context. Jung emphasized that beyond its physical form, the mandala is an internal symbol representing the union of opposites, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, the personal and the collective. By working with mandalas, we are not only connecting with our own psyche, but also with a universal dimension that underlies all of humanity. In therapeutic practice, Jung used mandalas as tools to help his patients explore and understand their inner world. He asked them to draw them without restrictions or judgments, as a way to express what words could not. The resulting mandalas often contained clues about the individual's emotional and psychic state. For example, a mandala with rigid lines and dark colors might reflect a sense of confinement or depression, while one with fluid shapes and bright tones might indicate openness and renewal. The mandala also has a meditative aspect. In Eastern traditions, mandalas are used as objects of contemplation, helping the practitioner focus their mind and transcend rational thought. Jung observed that this practice had a similar effect on his patients. Drawing or meditating on a mandala could induce a state of calm and clarity, allowing them to connect with their inner center. This center is not only a place of emotional balance, but also the core of the self, where all our potentials reside. In addition to its therapeutic function, the mandala acts as a visual reminder that life is not linear, but cyclical. It represents the nature of personal transformation processes. We do not move in a straight line but spiral, returning to the same themes and challenges from different perspectives. This cyclical movement is essential for individuation, as each turn brings us closer to our true essence. The mandala also has a philosophical meaning. Jung believed it was a manifestation of the inherent order in the universe, a kind of psychic map reflecting the structure of the cosmos and our psyche. In his alchemical studies, he found parallels between the circular diagrams used by alchemists and the mandalas spontaneously created by his patients. Both sought the same goal, the reconciliation of opposites and the creation of a harmonious whole. However, working with mandalas is not just an introspective activity, it also has practical implications. It invites us to reflect on our lives from a broader perspective, asking ourselves, am I in balance? Am I aligned with my purpose? By focusing on the mandala, we develop a greater capacity to observe ourselves with compassion and without judgment, allowing us to identify patterns and areas that need attention on the path of self-discovery. The mandala is not just a symbol, but a powerful tool that guides us toward our center, reminding us that even though life is filled with chaos and conflict, there is always a place of balance within us. This balance does not mean the absence of challenges, but the ability to navigate them with clarity and confidence. As Jung wrote, the mandala is the symbol of all life. It is the totality of the world in its divine, human, and cosmic aspects. By working with mandalas, we approach the realization of that wholeness within ourselves, connecting with our deepest essence and with the universal order that surrounds us. It is a reminder that, like the circle, our journey never has a definitive end, but it always moves toward integration. The return is the culminating phase of the journey toward the soul, but it does not signify a final end. It marks a new beginning after having explored the depths of the unconscious, faced the shadow, integrated the archetypes, and worked with symbols such as mandalas. We return to the everyday world transformed. It is a return home, but with a completely new perception and awareness. This moment, which Jung considered essential in the process of individuation, marks the start of a more authentic life, aligned with our true essence. In the hero's journey, as described in myths and archetypes, the return is the moment when the hero returns to the world with an elixir, something valuable gained during the journey. This elixir could be wisdom, a new perspective, or transformation. Similarly, the inner traveler who has followed the path of self-discovery brings with them a deeper understanding of themselves and the world. The difference is that in this case, the elixir is not a physical object, but a psychic transformation. One of the greatest challenges of the return is integrating what has been learned into daily life. It is easy to get lost in routine, external expectations, and the demands of the modern world, forgetting the truths discovered in the internal process. However, Jung insisted that the purpose of the journey to the soul is not to escape reality, but to learn to live in it with greater awareness. This integration is what gives true meaning to the experience. A key aspect of the return is the ability to maintain balance between the conscious and the unconscious. During the journey, we face aspects of ourselves that we were previously unaware of and learn to integrate them. However, this balance is not permanent. It requires practice and constant attention. The tools used during the process, such as dream interpretation, meditation, and connection with symbols, remain essential in daily life to keep us centered. The return also carries a responsibility to others. Jung believed that a person who has worked on their individuation process positively influences their environment. By living authentically and in alignment with their true self, we inspire those around us to do the same. This doesn't mean imposing our ideas or knowledge on others, but rather being a living example of what it means to live with a deeper connection to oneself and the world. Moreover, the return compels us to reconsider our relationships and societal roles. Often, the revelations made during the journey push us to let go of old patterns and dynamics that no longer reflect our inner truth. This can be painful, as it involves parting with people, situations, or beliefs that once felt essential. However, this process of release is necessary for living with greater integrity. At this stage, life takes on new meaning. We are no longer driven solely by external or superficial desires, but by a deeper sense of purpose. This purpose isn't always grand or dramatic. It often reveals itself in small acts of kindness, in caring for ourselves and others, and in seeking harmony in all aspects of life. It's a reminder that true transformation isn't about achieving an ideal, but about living fully in the present moment. Another challenge of the return is accepting that the work is never truly finished. Individuation is not a linear process, nor does it have a final endpoint. It's a continuous cycle of self-discovery and growth. Each time we face new challenges or stages in life, we embark on the hero's journey once again, but at a different level. Recognizing this frees us from the pressure to reach a destination and allows us to appreciate the journey itself. The return benefits not only the individual but also the collective. Jung viewed the work of self-discovery as a service to humanity. Every time we reconcile with our shadow, confront our complexes and find our center, we contribute to the well-being of the whole. Our conscious or unconscious actions and attitudes influence those around us. By returning with greater balance, we become catalysts for change in our environment. Finally, the return invites us to live with gratitude. Having faced the challenges of the soul and found a greater sense of wholeness is a gift that few dare to seek. This gratitude extends not only to the universe or external forces, but also to ourselves for having the courage to embark on this journey. It's a moment to acknowledge that while the path has been difficult, it has also been deeply enriching. As Jung said, the journey toward oneself is the greatest achievement we can reach, and at the same time, the greatest gift we can offer to the world. The return is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a life rooted in truth, connection, and wholeness. It proves that facing ourselves, though difficult, is the most courageous and transformative act we can undertake.